guys, what's up? It's Dave, and today is a little different. I am super excited. What the heck is all this stuff? Well, today I am going to build a PC. I'm gonna build it. I'm gonna show you exactly how you can build yours as well. So I've got the case, I've got the chip, the CPU, I've got the cooling system, I've got the RAM, got the power supply, got my thermal paste over there, got a couple of fans, and in this box is the motherboard. And we're going to be building an AMD Ryzen 3950X chipset into this motherboard. So let's get started, shall we? The first thing you might want to get is a number 2 screwdriver with a magnetic tip. Okay, really important so you don't lose those screws in and amongst all this stuff, because it can be a pain to get them back. Next thing you want is like either needle nose pliers or something in case something does drop. You can reach down real quick and pick them up. And then you're going to want to get a pair of scissors, the smallest ones you can find, or wire cutters would be really good. I filched these out of my daughter's play chest, so that's why we have these, and I think they're going to work just fine. Okay, so we're all cleaned up. We got our anti-static pad down. We've got our handy dandy knife with which to open the lovely B&H photo box. I love it when these things show up. It's like Christmas morning. It's like there's so much inside here just waiting to be awesome. Now this is the motherboard. One that I chose might be a little bit much for what I need to do at the moment. It is the Gigabyte Master, and this is all based on the 570 chipset. So, there it is. There it is. There it is. Cue 2001 music here. So this sucker is quite heavy, and it is a gaming motherboard. It's based on the AM4 socket. Perfect design for the 3950X, because as an editor, as a media professional, as somebody who plugs in a ton of stuff, this guy has all kinds of things in it that I'm going to want. So make sure we keep the boxes though. Very important. Okay, now check that guy out. Oh my gosh, this thing is going to be such an update from my 2008 Mac Pro Tower. Can you believe that? I have used that sucker for 12 years now. I have maxed it out. It has been going like crazy. And now is the time to gut it. I'm going to take the old legacy graphics card out of it to put into this system just to test it out. Because right now I am waiting on the new 3080 Ti graphics cards to come out. I was going to buy a 2080 Ti, but it's July right now as I'm filming this. And in September, the new 3080 cards are going to be coming out. And so I figured I can probably just cannibalize my old system, even though it's a legacy card. I think it's a GeForce 570. So like it's several years old, but it'll at least get me up and running to be able to test this thing out. It's like Dawn of Man from 2001. So cool. So now we're going to take the motherboard out of the packaging. Get a good look at this guy. Be very, very careful when you take these things out. It is quite heavy. Then you're going to unpack your RAM. Then you're going to unpack your cooler. You're going to put those things together. Okay, so we're using the G-Skill. It's DDR4. I really wanted to get fast RAM for the system I'm building, so you can check that out. Pretty cool stuff. Ultimately, I wanted to go with 64 gigabytes. 128 is probably overkill for what I want to do right now, but 64 for a lot of the visual effects stuff, a lot of After Effects, a lot of Blender, things like that. I wanted to go with 64 gigs, and this stuff fit the bill, so pretty cool. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install our CPU. Okay, the CPU, in this case, is the Ryzen 3950X. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the good stuff. It is 16 cores, 32 threads. Ta-da! There's the chip right up here. So real important when you are dealing with a CPU, don't ever touch the surface of this thing, okay? Don't put your fingers right on the front of it. or the back of it, right? You want to hold it very, very gingerly by the sides, because the oils and the dirt and everything else on your skin will mess up the thermal conductivity. You don't want that, okay? You don't want that. You want to keep it nice and clean and smooth. And later when we put on the thermal paste, it'll do everything that it's supposed to do without anything interfering with it, like grime from your fingers. So real important, don't touch the front, okay? So now, once we have this guy out, you can pry off the plastic like so. And you see a bunch of pins here on the back. You can see that. Okay, all these gold pins, that's what's going to go down on the actual motherboard. You want to reach in here and grab it by the sides, okay? Just like that. You don't want to touch the surface at all. Now on this, you have this little gold arrow on this side, right there. Okay, can you see that? And whereas all the other ones are black. Okay, so there's this little arrow right here, okay, pointing in. And you want to make sure that that little arrow is lined up. But before you do that, you want to lift this little bar, okay? So you push it out just a little bit to release it from the tensioner. You want to make sure that that's up. All right, so here we go. We're going to install this guy right now. We can drop this guy in here. Make sure that's up. We drop this. You don't have to force it. Just make sure that the pins are kind of lined up. You'll feel it drop in, okay? There, just like that. Nice little click. So you don't have to force it. You don't have to press it down. Now, all you got to do is press this little guy down. It will give you some pressure. Don't be afraid of that. And slip it around and let it click in. And there you go. Now your CPU is installed. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our cooler. And I bought the Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 4. Now this thing apparently is just an absolute wonderful cooler. It's very well reviewed. It is super quiet, at least so they say on the reviews and on the benchmarks, but it is not without its difficulties installing. So this is going to be a bit of a challenge. I understand that the fan clips themselves are really hard on the fingers, and there is a question on whether or not this thing gets in the way of the RAM. So make sure that as you're installing this, that you look at the fit and see whether or not, before you put the fan on the cooler itself, on the heatsink, that you make sure that your DIMM slots are not being blocked by this thing. So fun. Okay, so there we have it. You can see the interior of it. Yeah, get a good look. And the finishes on this are really quite nice. Now, I'm going to have a system that you can see into, and it has all the bells and whistles and so on with the RGB. Not that I'm going to use all of those, but it is nice in case you do want to show off. Be Quiet has made a very, very nice situation here with the finishes. So let's make sure that we can take this out again without wrecking anything. So here are our manuals. Very important. This is our user manual, probably in a lot of different languages. Indeed, that's in German. This one's in English, so we'll hold that aside. Gracias. That's in Spanish, French, Russian, Italian. Cool. But we're going to stick with English, okay? Because that's what we know and that's what we want. One of the things I highly recommend is you guys keep all the paperwork and all the original packing material till you're darn sure that you're not going to need it anymore. Because even if you do sell it, you're going to want that stuff for the new buyer, just to feel good about having their own boxes and warranty cards and anything like that. Oh, and I also recommend that you register all your gear. You sign up for the websites so that you can make sure that you're kept abreast of any recalls or weirdness or new drivers, anything like that. You want to make sure that you're real gentle with this when you pull it out of the box, because sometimes these heat sinks are so thin because, of course, you know, they need to be for heat dissipation. And then make sure in the box there's nothing left over. Sounds like there's something left over. So you want to make sure that you're really not missing anything here, because right here we have, looks like an offset screw. Once the styrofoam is off, you get a pretty good look at the top of the heat sink. And those heat sinks are really where the heat is going to dissipate from. And over here, you have the pipes going through what essentially is the thermal coupling to the CPU. So this whole thing will sit on top of the CPU, and this will engage with the CPU in order for it to gather the heat being put off by the chip and dissipate it through the heat sinks. So you'll see if you look at the CPU itself, okay, this guy and this guy are the same size. See that? So this guy sits right on top of that guy. And the thermal paste that we put down on top of this helps the thermal conductivity between this and this. So you're pulling as much heat out of the CPU as you can possibly pull. You want this guy to run as cool as possible, especially if you're really loading it up, if you're overclocking it, if you're working all the cores together. This thing gets really, really hot. So you want to make sure the paste is well put on there so that it can conduct as best as possible into your cooler, and then it will take the heat through these pipes, put it out to the heat sinks, and then the fan will blow the heat away in the air. So it's a big system that works with air cooling, and that's to keep the CPU nice and cool so that you don't have anything blow up on you or run too hot. I remember, this was way back when, this is an amazing story. I was editing on my very, let's see, this was and I was editing a piece for the grand opening of Jurassic Park: The Ride. And it was meant to go out to all the press. So they were descending on Universal Studios all at once. There were like 300 or 400 press members all coming into a soundstage at Universal Studios where Ron Benzian and Lou Wasserman and Sid Sheinberg were all going to make this big announcement of Jurassic Park: The Ride and Steven Spielberg's involvement in this. And it was my job to edit together all the highlights of building and promoting Jurassic Park: The Ride leading up to the opening in one 3.5 minute sizzle reel to get everybody cheering. That was the goal. Well, we had very little time to do this, probably 2 days, 3 days, something like that. And I remember I was editing at Video Symphony in North Hollywood, or Burbank, I guess it was. And we were in this little room without a lot of airflow. And in this room, I was there cranking away on the Avid, and we worked for basically 48 hours straight. Now, get this, okay? It's about 5 o'clock in the morning before the 8 a.m. press conference, maybe a 9 a.m. press conference. And it's really hot, and we've been working the machine to death because I have all these effects and things flying in and moving around. And this was in the early days of the Avid where, I mean, this thing was internally hemorrhaging. I was throwing everything at it. And then we hit render, and we were really hoping it would all work. And then at about 5:45 in the morning, the entire machine melted down. I kid you not, the circuit board melted. I melted an Avid. So now what do? It's not even 6 o'clock in the morning. You got to get a tech out there to what? To fix the Avid? How do you do that? We didn't really know what to do because it was the only one that we had in the building, and all my stuff was on the hard drives inside of it, and everybody's freaking out. And so all these phone calls got made. And there was one guy, and I wish I remember his name. He swooped in like Batman, and he swapped out the motherboard. And it took him probably, I don't know, maybe 40, 45 minutes. So it's like 6:30 in the morning at this point, almost 7 o'clock. And we've got to show this thing to 400 press to go all around the world at 9 a.m. So we finish the edit, we render it out, we watch it back, make sure it's good, and we lay it back to tape. And then we have to drive like crazy over to Universal Studios, run it up to the soundstage. They didn't even have a chance to QC it on the thing. We ran in there, they popped it in right at 9 o'clock. And it played in a soundstage with 400 people in the big screen, giant sound, and it went off without a hitch. And at the end of that, everybody stood up and cheered. It was one of the greatest days. I mean, like, oh man. One of the things I love about making movies is that in every movie, there is a moment where all seems lost. And yet, through perseverance, through serendipity, through divine intervention, through the hero's journey, we get to rise again and solve that last problem and emerge victorious. And that's exactly what happened that day. However, when you're building a PC, make sure you've got plenty of airflow so you don't melt your motherboard, okay? I don't recommend it, I really don't. Back to this. It says we have 2 fans that come with it. I have not yet seen the fans, so I'm gonna guess the fans are somewhere else in our box here. And look at that, they're right in the middle of our cooler. So very carefully lift these out. And again, if possible, touch everything by the sides, very gingerly. You don't want to grab any kind of computer parts like you're grabbing a football or something. You just don't want to do that. So, okay, so here is one fan. Okay, I'm going to guess the other fan is on the other side. And there it is. It's right there. So, looks like one fan is already installed and the other fan has yet to be installed. And again, be very careful taking stuff out. But Be Quiet is kind enough to anticipate your needs. And they send you a screwdriver. They send you a number 2 magnetic tipped screwdriver, custom made from Be Quiet. Look at that. How fun is that? The next thing you want to do is you want to take these mounting brackets off, because these are for the stock cooler that comes with the CPU. I'll go ahead and take those out so that we'll make room for the brackets that come with the cooler itself. And be very careful when you're doing this not to drop any screws onto your CPU. Very nice of Be Quiet to include the screwdriver, save me a trip to Home Depot. But also, as you're taking these things out, you just want to be real gentle. Take them straight up and out so that you don't touch your CPU. So we'll open these without spilling them everywhere, which is always the tough part. But we can peel this open. So there's all our spacers that are going to go right up on top of these 4 holes. So it should just slip nice and easy right over the top of those. And these are to offset the brackets that are ultimately going to hold the heat sinks. Okay, so we'll make sure that we line the holes up for AM4 like that. Dropping in the screw. All right, so again, kind of finger tight there until we get the other one in. We want to balance them out. Never want to torque anything too tight. Computer parts bend very easily. Okay, so just finger tight like that. Go back and forth until it's snug. You never want to over tighten. Just enough so you're sure that it's tight. Yeah. There we go. Cool. All right, so those are in. Caution. The thermal paste supplied is not suitable for human consumption. Got it. Have we really progressed to the point where we need to put that in the instructions? We actually bought a different type of thermal paste. This is deep cool. This has an applicator that they really like. Again, highly recommended. And it's got its own spatula. How cool is that? All right. So here we go. Grease it up. We're going to use a little bit of, not too much, just a little bit across. Like so. See, that works well. I'm going to spatula it out. I'll cover the whole thing here. So maybe it requires a little bit more than what we have, which is fine. So again, this whole idea of the paste is for thermal conductivity. And ideally you want to cover the whole thing. so that you don't have heat trying to escape from parts, but not others. I'll make sure that you get a good connection between your cooler and the actual chip. I'll put a little bit more on. Emphasis on the more on. Now, ultimately, when you put the cooler on top of this, it will squish super, super tight. So you don't want to put on too much, which I actually might have done a little too much here, but we'll spatula it away. It's kind of like when you were a kid playing with Play-Doh, except a lot more expensive. With Play-Doh, if you ate it, you didn't have to run to the hospital. You just wait 6 hours and get to play with it again. All right, that's covered pretty well. Might squish out a little bit, but for now, it should make some good contact. And this is a real close-up look at the thermal paste on top of the CPU and then the brackets installed. And you want to have these screws right here, these screw holes, come right down into these guys. So make sure that you eyeball it carefully and make sure that mirrored surface comes down exactly on top of the chip. Okay. All right, so before we install the heatsink, it's really important that we make sure our RAM fits, especially in this first DIMM slot. So it's a good thing we check. So here's our first one. Now, when you go to install this, make sure that these little clips right here, all these little clips are pulled back, okay? Sometimes one side or the other will be fixed, but on this motherboard and on a lot of them, they both come away. So make sure you got all those aside. This is assuming you're gonna put RAM in each one of those. And then this little guy right here, maybe you see that. So this little slot right here is off center. So you want to make sure that that goes in the right slot, right? So if we put it this way, the actual slot is too far this direction. So flip it around and now it lines up just fine. So you want to make sure that that slot lines up with this little bridge deal here, okay? So that's how you know. And just make sure that it's nice and easy and press it down on both sides until you hear a click, okay? That's one, and that's two. So both of those clips will come in. Now these are all equal RAM sticks, so it doesn't really matter what slot they go in. They're all going to be filled, all 4 slots. Click, click, click. And just for yucks, I'm going to go ahead and put them all in there right now. I love having 64 gigs of RAM because that should last me for a little bit. This motherboard will accept up to 128 gigs, which is really overkill for any situation I'm going to do right now. But I make no promises for the future. You know what I'll do? I'll fasten this first. So we give the CPU a break. This thing is a monster. Okay, well that's nice and tight. And if we look way down under, if you look underneath, you can see there still is a tiny little bit of room above the RAM, but not much. But I'm glad I didn't get any taller RAM because that wouldn't have worked at all. All right. So this is a little cable right here that goes into your header, and we'll do that in a few minutes. So this plugs in down here along your motherboard, but let's make sure we get this other fan installed first, and then we will do that. Come on, baby. You know you want to. Just ease on in there. There you go. Good, 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 good. All right. So it's important that the fronts face the same way so that they pull air through rather than blowing against each other. I guess that's kind of an obvious, but just in case it's not, there you have it. That's in. Check it out. Right? You can't hear it, that's for sure. I'm sure the middle one will spin. So now we take this guy, which is our splitter, and we put both of these connectors together. And the idea here is that when you put it into the motherboard will control both of them in the same fashion so that they run in the same speed in the same direction. And be gentle, never force anything. Just make sure it's in the right spot, lined up in the right way. And there you have it. That is now plugged in. So these cables are basically running together here. Okay, so that's it. That's your cooler install. All right, ready to continue? Time to open the case. There it is. There's our new Phanteks 400A Eclipse RGB digital case. We are on the case. This is awesome. It just seems like a black case, right? But I look at this thing and I see movies and animation and music and sound production and I get so excited. All right. So this is a nice looking case. I like it. So real important, if you're gonna get a case like this or any case with a tempered glass door, you wanna be super careful, okay? Because if you undo these screws right here and you're not careful, it pops right off the hinges and it just comes slamming down and you can break your door. Don't do that, okay? Do not do that. And hopefully I don't do that either. Especially with something new like this, man. I don't even wanna get fingerprints on it, you know? It's like, eventually it'll all look, you know, fingerprinted, but right now, it's just kind of cool. I'm gonna take these off. I'm gonna lay the door down so that we can gain access to the inside. Keep it clean, always keep it clean. This part pops off, so you got two screws here in the back. You just take these guys, right? They've got a capture system so you don't totally screw up and lose your screws here. So you can loosen this, but they don't actually come out, so don't think that they do, okay? So once you get those loosened up, you kind of pull back a little bit on this thing, and you gotta kind of jiggle it just a little bit to get it tightened out, and then hold it very carefully, and it just lifts away like that. So really nice on the inside as well. Try to keep this obviously as clean as you can, and then this gives you real good access to the back here, and you'll see Phanteks has done a really great job with these wire connectors here. They're Velcro, and if you need more, you can get zip ties, things like that, but they've done a really nice job with cable management, which is one of the reasons why this case has been so well reviewed. So down here, you'll see these are the hard drive chassis, so you can pinch these and bring them out, and then this thing right here is your accessory box. Okay, so before we install the motherboard into the case, I've decided actually that I'm going to install the SSD into the motherboard before we put the motherboard in. So that's going to go in this slot right here. We've got 3 different slots for SSDs. And right now I've only got the one SSD. That's this guy, the Samsung. Pretty awesome. Things that's killer read-write speeds. And we're going to put it right here in the top slot. Tiny little dude. But boy, gonna be screaming. So, there he is, just a little guy. Okay, very gently take this cover off. Okay, now this cover actually, you gotta be careful with it because this actually acts as a heat sink. You've got this little piece of plastic right here that's going to actually lay down, this whole thing's going to lay down over the top of the SSD to provide heat dissipation. That's what these little guys are all about. So keep this very carefully to the side. And once we have the SSD installed, then we can put the cover right back over the top of it. So one thing you guys want to make sure of, okay, is that when you put your SSD in, once you put it in here, you'll notice that it's not long enough to stretch all the way to where the heatsink was. Some of them are, some of them aren't. There will be an offset hole within this, and actually there's 3 of them. You can see them there. 1, 2, 2, and 3. So within your motherboard box, right, you open this up and there's a bunch of stuff in here. You want to keep this all handy. There's going to be a little screw, okay, an offset screw. Okay, so this screw is just going to go right in here in this little hole here. Now remember, different SSDs have different lengths, so you want to make sure that you measure it out and you put it in the right hole for your particular SSD. You can tighten it up, and finger tight's pretty good. Okay, now we're going to put the SSD in. This awesome little dude is going to do a lot of our work in terms of accessing applications, things like that. You want to make sure that that notch is all lined up. You want to feel it out, okay? Slip it in there, and then give it a little gentle push, and you'll hear a click. And then you're going to want to push this guy down until it connects with that screw, and then you want to screw it back in, okay? So that little screw right there is what you're going to pull out of your motherboard case, and that's what's going to go on top here. You want to press it down slightly, not too hard, just enough to get that little screw to be set in there. So now the SSD is installed. We're going to get a lot of use out of that bad boy, okay? But you can't just leave it out there, hanging out there. You got to install this heatsink, right? So this guy that came off to begin with, you peel off the paper. Okay, it's nice and clean. And this goes right back over the top of your SSD drive. This slots in there, nice and easy, and that screw goes right back where it started. Gently screw that in over the top. Again, don't force anything. You don't want to mess up your SSD right after you've put it in. Just finger tight's good. Make sure it's all nice and snug in there. And away we go. All right, SSD installed. Once you have your motherboard all decked out, remember this is the I/O portion of things, okay? This is where your input output is. So all your USB 3s and your SDIFs and your videos and all that kind of stuff, and comes in this little hole right here, okay? This is your fan vent, and this hole is where the I/O should be. So I'm going to thread this in. You'll see through the back here where it comes in. So you want to make sure you line your I/O up with this hole, okay? And once it's there, then you're going to start screwing in your motherboard. So I'm going to lift the motherboard out for a second. So I want you to look at these little offsets right here, okay? These little screws. So these little offsets are really important for the motherboard because you don't want to have the motherboard right up against the metal. You want to be able to set it off. And so some case manufacturers will give these already installed. If you don't see those, okay, and in this particular case, there are 9 little offsets. But if you don't see those, what you want to do is you want to go back into your motherboard accessories and you want to find an offset screw. And most case manufacturers will give you that option for the offsets so that your motherboard doesn't sit right against the panel. And what it does is it allows you now to line up the screws for your motherboard. So these are the screw holes for your motherboard, okay? And in this particular case, I have 9 holes that hold it in. There's a couple more up here, and then there's one right here in the center. So right now I'm going to start by screwing the one right in the center. And again, you want to make sure that you're lining up your screw through the hole with your offset. And you don't want to tighten these all the way down until they're all in. And just like we did with the cooler, you want to make sure that you're putting them in kind of finger tight. So right now that's a little bit tight. I'm actually going to back it off a little bit because you don't want to bend your board. You want to have everything even. all the way around your board. Okay, so now that we've got the motherboard installed, we're going to put this guy upright. Make sure that we're not crimping the cords, anything like that. I want to make sure that we're all properly mounted. And so there you are. There's the motherboard installed. So now that we've got the case all figured out and we've got the motherboard in there, it is time to put in the power supply. And the power supply is what goes in the back of the case right here. I went with the 850 watt from EVGA, the Supernova. And I decided to get the titanium because I got a really good deal on it. And the difference between bronze and gold and titanium or platinum is the regulation on the voltage. And it's basically the efficiency of the power supply. So there it is. Got the EVGA 850 watt power supply. Pretty cool, right? All right, so we're gonna open this guy. Now the nice thing about, let's see, okay, here's all the cables. Look at that, they look like those Halloween worms. So we're going to set all these out, because there's a ton of them. We'll go over what each of these things do. But again, you want to make sure that nothing's left over. So we've got screws to screw in the actual main power supply. We've got pin connectors. You want to make sure you're not missing anything. And then the actual power supply itself is this big bad boy here. There you go. So you'll have a fan. In the back here is where your plug goes in. There's the switch. And then over here is where all your cables plug in. And depending on which power supply you get, you'll see that each of these has a little label in terms of what to put where. And those all go with your cabling and then into your motherboard. So consult your manual, real important, depending on which power supply you have. That'll tell you exactly which pin goes in which hole. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Sometimes you have a cable that actually looks like an 8-pin cable, but you got to be careful because some cables look similar to others. So for instance, right, you have a CPU cable right here. You see that? And that's got 8 pins on it. But you got to be real careful because actually the 8 pins split like that. Okay, they split. So that's how you can identify. So make sure you look at what the actual designation is on the cable itself, okay? Because it'll tell you whether it's CPU, whether it's GPU, whether it's SATA, whether it's VGA. Now, you may not need all of these cables depending on what you do, depending on how much power you require and what kind of peripherals you have. This is considered a fully modular power supply, which means that it has no cables plugged into it initially. You got to plug them all in. See that? That's our motherboard cable. Looks like that. There you go. Now, what else are we going to need? We know we're going to need the CPU. So there's our CPU. And again, these all go to different ports on your motherboard, and you can consult your motherboard guide, your manual, for exactly where to put them in so you're not guessing. So the 8-pin goes into the power supply for the CPU, and then you either use the 4-pin or the 8-pin together on the motherboard. Here comes the click. Oh, so satisfying. So one of the things, when you put in the power supply, you want to make sure that you're putting the fan down to the bottom of the case. Because in this particular case, and in a lot of them, you have a dust catcher down here. You have this little fine mesh where as the air is going through, it catches all of that. And the fan is going to draw that air so that you are cooling the power supply. And you want to make sure that it is facing that little mesh to make sure that you've got all your heat going where it's supposed to and not getting dusty, okay? Take it like this, slide it in carefully. These things are pretty big. And of course, all your cables are gonna rub and do and whatever. You wanna make sure those are out of the way. So very carefully slide it in. Try not to jam anything. Again, don't force it. If you have a little resistance, find out what's giving you resistance and move it around, because this is where things can break real easily, and you don't want to do that, especially if you have the cables all wrapped in here. They can be pretty stiff, and you don't want to start jamming stuff where the controllers or the multi-pins start bending and breaking. You want to be real gentle with things as you slide them in. And this is a pretty big power supply, so make sure that you can really be careful about how it goes in, because it is a challenge oftentimes to get it to fit with all these connectors. Now, sometimes, let's see, it's just going to go over that little lip. And there we have it. It sits in there. So that's what it looks like when it's in. And we're going to screw it together using these 4 little screws. They just go right in the back here. Okay, so now that the power supply is in, we're going to leave this just for a second, because what I want to do before we do anything else and hook up the motherboard to power and all that kind of stuff, we need to install one more fan. So if you can see from here, there's 3 fans that come with this case that are stock. See these up in front here? I'll give you a little better look. So these fans are stock that come with the case. And then of course the CPU cooler has 2 fans that we've installed. And that's going to draw the hot air away from the CPU, but it's got to go out the back. So we want to get a little extra airflow, so we add this second fan. Actually, that would be the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th fan to the back here. So we got one specifically for this purpose, the Phanteks one. And we're going to install that guy now before we start hooking up all the power. So these are real simple to install. This is your fan header, or the connector that goes to the header on the motherboard, which is right up in here. We'll see that in a little bit. And 4 screws. Pretty simple. Of course, it's simple until it's not, right? There's always that point where you're like, this should have been so simple. The power cable for the fan has got to go all the way up in here to this guy, okay? So as you're looking for it, look where it says fan, and then look for your little 4-pin marker, okay? Your little 4-pin connector. That's where this fan is going to connect to. This is power coming from the motherboard, or excuse me, from the power supply to the motherboard. But that right there, so that's where you're going to plug your fan in, okay? That little 4-pin connector right there. Something to keep in mind is that you have 2 different sides here, right? You have the side with the logo on it, which is kind of the back. You got the wire, you see all this kind of stuff. I call it the ugly side. And then you got the pretty side, right? You got the pretty side. Now in this particular situation, because fans can go just about anywhere, keep in mind that the pretty side is what draws air in. The ugly side is what spits air out. So in this particular case, because we're using this as an exhaust fan, we want to actually put the ugly side toward the back of the case. We want to put the pretty side toward the front of the case, because remember, the air is going to come in this direction and out that direction, okay? So ugly side out. And the deal is that you can run a 3-pin connector into a 4-pin header on the motherboard. You just got to be really careful to run it into the rail. So in this particular case, the top pin actually is left naked. So we've got the fan all in there nice and neat. We're going to start routing cables. Okay, so on the back of the case now, we're going to route from the power supply unit, okay, we're going to take our main cable, our main power cable, and we're going to run it up through the grommet here. Okay, and on the other side, you see how it comes through, okay, comes through the grommet right here. Now this is your motherboard connector, okay, right there. You see how the designation on there says motherboard? All right, so this is going to curl around and go on your motherboard connector right there. It just bends around and clicks right in, and you'll hear a click. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to plug in the CPU. So that's this guy right here, and it actually says CPU on it. You see that? I know it's probably pretty small over there. So we're going to route this to our CPU power, which is up here in the top. Plugs in right up here. So make sure that you guys are putting all the power into your motherboard. It's time to route the cable for the GPU. And that is this little 6+2 pin controller. Just come right through the little grommet here, get enough length so that way you're all set when you've got your graphics card to come in here just to swing around and power it up, okay? And you can tell that that's the deal because this little 8-pin splits apart and becomes a 6/2 pin. So very important, keep that in mind. The other thing too is, and again, this is all about cable management, okay? There are areas in here like this little guy right here, he's another fan header, okay? I'll turn this so you can see a little bit better. So this one right here, that guy's a little fan header, all right? So you don't want to have the cable in front of that because then you're going to block. So just think through your cable management when you pull stuff through, okay? So we're going to leave this here for now until we get our GPU in. And now we've got all these other cables, okay? Got all these other cables. What are we going to do with these? So the deal here is, rather than show you each individual thing about where's the header and what do I do to set it up, here's what you do. You get your manual. Turn to the point where it says internal connectors. Can you see that? Internal connectors. Now that gives you this whole list here of what's where, right? It gives you the schematic and it gives you what each thing does on your motherboard. So consult that, all right? Because once you have your internal connectors figured out, then you can figure out from the end of the connector what it says, right? And connect it. So you see 12 through 16, you see how it says F panel, F audio? That's front, just so you know. Okay, so I'm gonna hook these up now. You consult your own manual, and then we'll come back when it's all routed, and we'll make sure that everything's in the right place, okay? And then we get to install our hard drives. But first, we route the power. Okay, so here we are with my schematic, the internal connectors, and the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna connect all 3 of these fans. So if we come back around here, you gotta find the cables for the fans, okay? And you tease all this stuff out because some of these cables are going to power, some of these cables are going to RGB, but these are the 3 actual fan pins right there. And they're all 3-pin. We're gonna run all of these through the grommet right here into the motherboard. And again, cable management, cable management, cable management. So we're gonna come back and clean all this stuff up later. But for right now, I'm gonna stick these guys through. You can see them coming through there. And we're gonna come around to the front. And so this is our main power, and then the 3 headers for the fans are right underneath the main power there. So the long one is going to fan number 1. So we're gonna fit that up top. There we go. And then the medium one, number 2. And again, it's kind of foolproof. You got to make sure you line your connector up properly. And it should just slide on. And if it doesn't, again, don't force it. Do not use the force, Luke. Okay, so those are in, nice and clean. And I'm actually going to pull up some of the slack on the medium and the long, so that we have a nice tidy cable management going on here. Big into cable management. Okay, nice and clean. Just double checking that those are all in nice and tight. Indeed they are. So we're good to go. All right, so the next thing we've got is a motherboard digital RGB 3-pin. That's this guy right here. You see how it says motherboard RGB 3-pin. So on the schematic, if we look down here on the schematic, we look down here for LED, right? So there's the digital LED right there. So we're looking for number 8 or number 9. And that means that that connector is right there at the top. So it's either 8 or 9. And it's the LED C1, C2, And this is D LED, and I think this is D motherboard D RGB. So that's digital, digital, digital. So we'll go for number 9, D LED, and that's right up there. Okay? So we'll stick it through the grommet, same as we did with the fan controllers. Now we'll look around the front. So there's our 3-pin that just came through the grommet. And up at the top, way up there, there's your 3-pin. You see how it has 2 offset and then 1? You can look and see that it indeed has 2 offset and then 1. So that's where we're going to put it. You can see the header up there. Now we want to put in our audio, our HD audio. There we go. And that's going to go in number 13. So if we look at our schematic, 13 is right over here. So bottom left of the motherboard. So there's our HD audio. And again, making sure that our cable management is as clean as it can be. And we're going to clean all this up later. We're going to stick this through the grommet, like so. Feed it in there, because it's probably going to go a ways, and we'll pick up the slack when we're done with that. So now we come back over to the front, to where the motherboard is. We'll pick up our cable that we just pushed through, and we'll locate our connector all the way here in the back of the case, well, front of the case, whatever, bottom corner where it says audio. You want to line it up, make sure the pins are right, make sure that you do it nice and even, push it straight in. You're going to hear a little click. There you go. So that's in there nice and tight, HD audio. Okay, so we're going to come back with the cable and make sure that that runs nice and clean. Now remember, your GPU is going to run in here, so you might want to continue to give this a little bit of slack until the graphics card comes in, and then we'll do all our cable management from there. All right, so the next 3 switches that we have are the power switch, the HD LED, and the reset switch. And all those are found on the front panel header. So connecting the power switch, the reset switch, the speaker. Note the positive and negative pins before connecting the cables. It's really important you understand which is positive and which is negative. So turn it over and you see that little arrow right there? That's positive. Okay, so make sure that you follow the proper pin connections in your manual. It's going to save you so much time and effort. Okay, and sometimes they go in upside down, right side up, different pins, all that stuff. Seriously, this is like one of the main reasons why when you get to the end of your build, your computer won't turn on. Double check, positive to positive, negative to negative. So in this case, our hard drive LED, positive's on the left. But look at the reset switch, positive's on the right. They're not all the same. So be real careful with how you put them in, okay? So check it out. There's the arrow. So this goes in right side up like this, just under the power switch. And actually, just so we can see what we're doing, I'm going to remove the power switch. We'll put that in again after this is done. Sometimes these things are a little easier to put in outside of the case. So just keep that in mind. If you're building and you've got enough room, great. So there we have our reset switch next to the LED activity switch. And now we got to put our power switch back on. So there you have it. Everything's where it's supposed to be. Now, if you don't pay attention and you put these things in either the wrong hole, the wrong pin, or the wrong polarity, You're going to get all the way to the end of your build. You're going to be so excited to turn it on, and it's not going to turn on. And you're going to wonder what the heck happened. Just because it's not getting power from the switch. Now with these, they don't actually click in. You just push them in and they kind of hold on their own, which is kind of a drag because if something gets jostled and it comes out fairly easily, I think that's a flaw in the motherboard making, or at least in the connector deal. But that's my opinion. On we go. So with our GPU cables, we're going to move them out of the way because the next cable that we want to install is this guy. It's a USB 3, and this powers the USB ports up at the top of the case. So just like last time with these GPU cables, we're going to thread our cable right through this lower grommet. You see that? The blue sticking through? So we'll bring this guy around and we'll stick this right into the USB 3.0 socket. We'll take a SATA cable from the back here that we've plugged into our power supply. No click, but that went in just nice. So that's coming from the power supply up through the SATA cable to the power button. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so now that all that stuff is in, we've got this last little bit. Like, what the heck is all this stuff? And really, unless you're gonna be adding other RGB elements to your build, you don't need this. You can tuck this away. This little male cable connects to your RGB stuff, other Phanteks stuff that you want to program from your computer. We don't need it because I'm not going to be running a lot of RGB. Now you might. Me? Nope. So we'll tuck that away for now. We've got our SATA cables still back here, but those are going to go for the hard drives, which we will put in a minute. But before we do that, I would like to introduce you to an old trusty friend of mine. This is the Kona LHI card, which I purchased for my Mac Tower back in about 2012, I want to say. So this is a legacy card, and what it is meant to do, it is meant to digitize from analog sources. I know, what is this word analog? Oh my gosh. It is a term from the Jurassic era that had to do with actual magnetic tape. I know, probably a lot of you don't even know what that is anymore. But for those of you who do, this comes in really handy when you're starting to digitize all kinds of stuff from back in the day. And I just went through a ton of stuff from my archive from early in my career, and this little guy helped me digitize it. So some of this stuff you guys will see on my YouTube channel coming up, and that was digitized with this guy. So I figured, why not? I've got the room, why not put it into the new system and see if the drivers will still work, and maybe I can just keep it for a while. Here's the thing about PCIe. They're backwards compatible. So this is a PCIe 4 slot down the bottom, 8 and then 16 with the full-size slots. And the little guy in here is PCI 1 still. Itty bitty. But this guy's a PCI 2. Well, there's no PCI 2 slots in there, so what do? Not to worry. This can go in any PCI slot. In fact, any PCIe card will work in just about any PCIe slot that can handle the size of it. But what happens? Are you going to get all 16 lanes? Are you going to get all the speed you can get out of your motherboard? No. Whatever the lowest common denominator is between either the card or your slot, that is what it's going to run at. So a PCI 2 card in a PCI 4 slot is going to run at PCI 2 speeds. You can use it, but don't think by putting this card in a PCI 16 slot, you're going to get 16 speeds. You're not going to. But that's all right. We've got other things for that. So I think we're going to put this in the bottom slot. Ta-da. All right, that is in. Sweet. All right, so now we've got this bad boy. And we're going to stick him in the PCIe slot right here. And that is an 8-lane slot. Look at that. Yes. Yeah, baby. Awesome. It works. Haha. We got it. This is so cool. All right. So that's in there. The LHI is in there. Doggone it. It works. This is so great. Okay. So now we've got to add the power cables. Okay, click. There we are. I'm relatively happy at the moment. Now, hard drives. So we've got a couple of things here in this particular case. And of course, we're all wired up here, so it's a little messy. Probably would have been good to put these in beforehand, but it's no big deal. Again, we shall not be daunted. All right, so this is a hard drive tray. The way this thing goes in there, you want to make sure that your SATA cable and your power cable are facing out so that you can actually attach your power to those. So we're going to stick this in like this. It should slide in just nice and easy. Optimal word should. All right, I got to line up the screw holes. That's the deal. Pull it apart and it fits in nice and snug, just like that. This whole thing just slides right in. It's real simple. So there's two down here. I'm just going to use the top one for now. And what's nice about this whole thing is that it's got all of these for optional hard drives, which quite frankly, I might use. Now, our other drives, our SSDs, they go right here. So these brackets are pretty simple. They just lift up and they come off just like that. And then there are screws, again, in your case goodies, there are screws that you use to screw in the side of this thing. So if we have, they've really thought this through. It's actually a really nice thing. So you just put them right here on the side. Screw it on in. Not too tight. And again, SATA cable and power cable down, data and power down. Okay, so now that the SSD is in there, we can just put it right back on the bracket. Press down gently, not too hard, and it just snaps right in there. So there you go, there's hard drive number one. Now we're gonna go get hard drive number two. Each SATA drive gets power from the power supply via the SATA cables, okay? So these, now don't get confused between the SATA cables and the Molex cables. The Molex cables have a 4-pin to them that look like this, okay? And that's not what you use to power up the drives. What you use to power up the drives is the SATA cable, okay? And the SATA cable looks like this. And it's got a little tiny, long, slitted kind of thing here, okay? And that's what goes on. And the cables that came with our power supply, they have 3 SATA power cables or connectors on them. So you can actually power 3 different SATA drives using this one, and then this goes to the power supply. And you push it in, feel a little click. Don't be afraid to give it a little bit of pressure, make sure it's in there. And there you go, one SATA powered drive, and then we'll take the other one off here. We'll do the same thing with the other connector. SATA power. And these things can pretty much go in only one way, so make sure you don't force it if it's not going in properly. All right, so there it is. See that? Okay. Here, I'm going to unplug it for you and plug it in again just so you can see it carefully. Okay, so your pins go to the pins, put it in there, and there you go. Okay, so that's powered. So now both of these guys can go back in their respective trays. And the way Phanteks has designed this thing, it's a nice little situation where you can just line up the holes, press in a little bit, and then press down. And there you go. It's all set and ready to go. Press in, push down. I'm going to double check this one. Press in, push down. And there we are. 2 SATA powered drives with power. And then this guy can just get put in with the rest of the cable management, and it'll all be nice and clean. Okay, so now that we have power in, we need data. SATA comes in 1 power cable and 1 data cable. Now with the power cables, you can actually daisy chain based on the connectors, right? Like you have this kind of a SATA connector with a bunch of different power splitters on it. So you can actually power 3 different devices from this one SATA cable coming from the power supply. But data is not that way. SATA power is one thing. SATA data is another. And you need 1 cable per device. Now, the motherboard has 6 different data ports for SATA, and you can only have one data cable and port per device. So it's got 6 internal. If you need more than that, you need to get yourself a SATA controller. So get out your motherboard box with all its goodies, and in there you will find a SATA data cable, okay? And the SATA data cable, and again using the highly respected method of ripping it open with your teeth, we'll get to the SATA data cable. And the SATA data, actually this is 2 cables in one, which is nice, but the SATA data looks like this, okay? It's a little different than the power cable. It's still a little slit like that. And on one end, you may have 2 flat ones like this on some cables. And then there are some cables that actually come in this little 90-degree doohickey, which is great. So you can plug in that to your motherboard and this to your drive if you need to. So now when you want to find the data ports on your motherboard, definitely consult your manual. But on this particular motherboard, the data ports are right here. Okay, they're right here behind the GPU. And you see how the openings are facing toward the front of the computer. So you're going to want to put your cables in horizontally. And you can see how there's, let's see if I can get out of the way of the wires here. There are 6 different SATA ports here. So 2 on top, 2 in the middle, and 2 down below. So we're going to be utilizing all of those data ports by the time we're done. But today we're only going to hook up 3 of them. So keep in mind that these SATA data cables have a little L shape in them, and that corresponds to the L shape actually on the port. So you never want to force them. You always want to make sure that that lines up so that you can have a good connection. So this is now a right angle connection. So I'm going to push that in, click. We're going to use all 3 in the back of the motherboard first. And the SATA data cables, they have the same type of connector on either side. So you don't really have to worry about which side goes in which side first, because if it clicks in one side, it'll click in the other side. Now you can see all 3 SATA cables that we're going to use that are plugged in. And this is the bottom one right here. So I'm just going to push that guy in. So we've got all 3 SATA cables in there now, but we've also got 3 more ports. So we've got the back ones used up, but we still have these 3 in the front if we need to run more. Okay, so I'm going to turn this around so you can see where the SATA data cables are running to. Because once you have your cable run from your power supply or from your motherboard, then they come out here, right in the back, just like them all. So this is drive number 1 for me, and this is going to be drive number 2, and then we're going to do all these 3.5-inch drives down there. So this is the SATA cable that came from that top port. So now, again, we'll take these off just for sake of showing you and for ease of putting it in. So if you can see that, so that's where your power cable is going in, right? And this is where your data cable in. And just like the other one, you slip it in there, make sure that it's the right side, that you've got the little doohickey lined up. In this case, it's the clip up, and you push until you hear the click. And there you go. That's your data cable. And we'll slip that right back on that. We'll do the same thing on this side. Make sure we have the right cable that we want coming to this one. All right, there it is. So once again, you've got your power, and then you've got your data. And the data is going to push in like that until you hear that click, and then that goes right back on the chassis. Just got to line up the holes. That's the tricky part. Go to your home. There we go. All right. So there you go. Powered and dated. So now we're going to go down to this guy. I'm just going to pull it out again for you to see how this is going to attach, but it's very much just like the other ones. So now we've got our third data cable. My favorite thing. Click. I'll slide this guy back in there to the top until it clicks. So let's start cleaning this thing up. This is where zip ties and Velcro straps are your friend. Now, before we start zip tying everything, Phanteks gives us these nice little Velcro straps. So we're going to see how much we can clean up. And again, remember, you want to make sure that you're not tugging terribly hard on anything because you don't want it to come loose from what you just spent a lot of time plugging in. But we want to get everything inside this case, all tucked nice and neat. If possible, you want to get controller mechanisms out of the way, things like power connectors, like on this SATA over here. The power cables can tuck in back into underneath where the power supply is. But again, be very careful, especially with these smaller cables, that you don't disrupt what's already there and in place. I'll zip tie these things together. And then, thanks to my daughter, I'm just going to clip this guy off. You can do that with wire cutters too if you want to. But now, everything should close up nice and neat. All the cables are nice and tight. Got a little excess here from the fan cables, but that's okay. It just loops around. It's not getting in the way of anything. And there you go. Cleaned up, I think as good as we can ask for right now. We've got all this RGB in here that's excess as well that we're not going to be needing, but our SATA controllers are still good. Power supply is still good. We got enough under there because of the reservoir here near the power supply. So this is pretty good. I think I can live with that. We'll see how it functions, of course, but for now, I think that's good. Your results may vary. So now, the moment of truth, or at least getting to the moment of truth. I'm going to put the case back on. All right, we got our clips all lined up. There we go. We're in business. Sweet. Okay, this thing closed up all nice and neat. We got our cables all managed in there. That thing is flush. Flush all the way around. Excellent. So now we can put our front cover on. It's on nice and snug, just like that. All right, here it is, the glass panel, the last thing to go on and go back in place before we try and turn this thing on. Sets right back where it started. Remember to hold it so it doesn't just flop off until all the screw connectors are back on here. Last thing you want to do is get to the very end of your build and then drop your glass. Oh, that'll be a drag. You don't want to do that. No, no, no. You've worked way too hard building this computer of yours. You want to make sure that it stays intact, looks awesome, performs even more awesome. Get all your games, get all your productivity. Okay, hook up your monitor. Okay, we also want to hook up the USB keyboard. All right, and we want to plug in our power. Okay, moment of truth. So we've got our monitor, we've got our keyboard, we've got our computer, and we've got our Windows media in the USB, okay? So what you want to do is put this right up here in your USB port and make sure power's on. Now we're going to power up the system. Now, there's two ways here. There's two things that's going to go on, okay? Number one, if you want to get into the BIOS, make sure that when you boot up, okay, you hit delete. Just mash that delete button, okay? Yeah, right there. Okay, you're gonna mash that delete button and that'll put you into your BIOS. Don't do anything with the BIOS yet. We wanna get a clean install. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with the BIOS later on, okay? You can overclock, you can format your drives, there's any number of things you can do, okay? But you don't wanna do anything right now. The only thing you do wanna do is you wanna make sure that you're installing to a clean drive. Take all the other drives that you have, maybe that have media on them or anything else, and you want to make sure that they are unconnected from the system, right? Just take your SATA power out of those drives so that the only drives you have in there are ones that you can do a clean install in, right? You can always, after we're done putting in Windows, you can always put in your other drives and tell the system to recognize them. But right now, when we go to install, make sure you don't have anything in there that has data that you want to keep. Okay, just in case you happen to install over the wrong drive, you don't want to do that. So right now, I'm going to show you how to boot into your BIOS, okay? When you boot up, which we will do right now, love it. Make sure you hit your delete key, okay? Just keep smashing your delete key like that. Let there be BIOS. Awesome. Okay, so now you can see we have all 16 gigs, all 4 of our 16 gigs, adding up to 64 gigs of RAM. That's pretty awesome. We've got our CPU frequency, temperatures, voltage, all this kind of stuff. The memory frequency, you'll notice that this is at 2141.09 megahertz. Now wait a minute, we bought 3600 megahertz. So what's the deal with that? Don't worry about that just yet. We're gonna actually go into the BIOS settings after we install media, the Windows media, and we're going to reset everything so that you get your clock speeds that you actually paid for. But right now, don't worry about it. Just leave everything out of the box just like it was. The thing I want you to look at, though, is that we have, in our SATA, you'll notice that now we have no SATA drives going on anymore. Okay, so zero, nothing. And the only drive that shows up that's available for our boot sequence is our 970 EVO Plus 1 terabyte. That's the NVMe that we installed directly onto the motherboard, which communicates directly with the CPU. That's our fastest drive. That's where we want to install Windows. So make sure that you don't have any other drives attached except the one you want to install to. All right, and then fan speeds, all that kind of stuff, we'll get to that. But right now, this is the most important thing because we want to make sure that we're installing where we want to. Okay, so let's go ahead and install Windows now. I'm going to shut down the computer, which I do by holding this for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So now take your Windows media, put it into your USB port, and restart the computer. Don't hit delete this time. You don't want to boot into BIOS. You actually want to boot from this particular drive. And hopefully it will boot from there because there are no other drives with stuff available. So hopefully the BIOS is smart enough where it will boot straight from that Windows Media key. So here it comes. The BIOS is forming. It's booting up. Now you'll notice it didn't click right into BIOS because it's looking for something right now. Bueller. Did I miss a step? I might have missed a step. Okay. Nope, I didn't miss a step. All right, so there you go. Windows is coming from our media drive here. So what do? Well, we're in the English language, US, enter your language preferences, yada, yada. So now we're going to press next. Yes, I want English. And we're going to click next. We want to install now. Yes, we do. Setup is starting. Are you guys as excited as I am? Okay, so this is our Activate Windows. This is where you put in your product key. So that is the long multi-digit code that you got when you purchased Windows from wherever you purchased it, hopefully from an authorized Microsoft retailer. And this is where you're going to put in your product key, okay? Now, I am not going to show you my key. You got to go get your own key. Okay, so moment of truth. My key is in there. All right, is your key in there? We're going to do this together. All right, go down and click next. And the computer will read what it needs to read any moment now. Ta-da! And we're now in the license terms. Okay, so if you want to read this, go read it and then come back. Blah, 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 blah. Yes, I accept the license terms because I am a speed reader and I read all of it. And click next. Okay, so what type of installation do you want? Now, if you're installing from a previous system and you're upgrading, you can do this. But what we want is the custom install. Okay, now this says it's advanced, but just walk through us here. Okay, the custom install is when you want to do a clean install. So we'll click that. Now, drive 0, unallocated space, 931 gigabytes. Okay, that is what our NVMe drive has on it. It's a 1 terabyte drive. It needs a little bit to be able to operate, but the rest of it is clean. So this is where we want to install our Windows. Click next. And now it is copying the Windows files, getting ready for the installation. This is where we get really excited because that little 0% right there is going to start growing 1%, 2%, 3%. And this is a whole lot faster than the old DVDs optical drive installations. When it comes off of your USB drive, it's going to go a lot faster. So it's already at 20%, so we're good there. And now we wait. Let's talk about a couple of things that we might have missed going through this whole thing, a couple of really common problems. Number one is when you manage your cables, it's really easy, especially when you're putting the case back on and this and that, for things to come dislodged. And when they do, the whole system will hang up. So if you're having those issues and you haven't gotten to this point, you want to make sure you go back through everything and be really, really meticulous about each individual part and piece that you install to make sure that it is in fact seated properly. So now our install is done. It's installing the updates. Now we're not connected to the internet. And the reason that we're not connected to the internet is I don't want to be a subject to Microsoft's online forcing me to get a Windows account in order to boot up my computer. So we do it offline so that I am not subject to that. Later on, we'll go form our Microsoft account where we can get all the updates and we can do the driver updates and everything else. But right now, I don't want to have to be subject to that. So I'm going to actually install my Windows when I'm offline. Okay? So now it's going through its reboot sequence right now. We've got our little system ready guy up here, checking the BIOS once again. And now it's going to boot into Windows. This is so exciting. It's like half the anticipation, right? It's like, is it going to work? Is it going to work? I hope it's going to work. If it better work, I'm going to have to redo this entire video. Ooh, it's doing something new now. Fading in. That's a good sign. Just a moment. What I noticed it's doing too is it appears to be running through the scaling of the monitor. Hey, there we go. Awesome. Let's start with region. Is this right? Let's see. United States. I'd rather be in the U.S. Virgin Islands right now, but we'll just say the United States, okay? Click yes. Just a moment. Is this the right keyboard layout? United States, Canadian Multilingual Standard, Irish. That's kind of cool. Southern Gaelic? Oh, Scottish Gaelic? I wonder what would happen if you clicked Irish. That would be kind of fun. I mean, when you boot up your computer, it goes, top of the morning to ya. All right, we'll just click US. Want to add a second keyboard layout? Not right now, but it will be fun later. We'll skip that. Let's connect you to a network. All right, you know what? I'm going to connect don't have internet just now because I don't want to have to worry about that Microsoft account being forced into that. So There's more to discover when you connect to the internet. I understand that. And we'll do that later when we have our access to the internet the way we want it. But for now, we're going to continue with limited setup. Who's going to use this PC? What's your name? You can put it in there. We're going to put in Dave. Hello, Dave. Create a super memorable password. Make sure to pick something you'll absolutely remember. Confirm password. There we are. Now, security questions. Okay, so you go through all the security questions. You hit just a moment, and then you'll want to choose all the privacy stuff that you want. Let's see, online speech recognition, find my device, inking and typing. No, we don't want to do any of this stuff. Location data, no, no, no. Okay, we don't want any of this stuff. We want privacy to be our privacy. We do not want our stuff to be Microsoft's. Okay, so I'm going to say no to all this stuff. We can always come back and change it later. I do not want to send Microsoft my activity history. I do not want to set up Cortana. Hi, how friendly. We're getting everything ready for you. This is awesome. This might take several minutes. Don't turn off your PC. Once Windows installs and you get connected to the internet, there are several items in your computer that'll probably need driver updates depending on the date and when you're doing it and if you're bringing across any other peripherals like I am with the old graphics cards. So make sure once you get online that you go through and update all your drivers and everything else first before you really start to use any programs, because that way you're going to start off with a nice, clean, fresh install with all the drivers updated, and then you can get on about your work. So there we have it. There's our Windows, guys. We're installed. Hopefully you're looking the same. And if you are, congratulations. You did it. You did your build. It's so cool. All right, now don't forget to hook up all your drives again, all right, so that when you power up the next time, you have all your hard drives available. Make sure all your cables are put away nice and neat. Make sure all the smudges are off your computer. Oh, there's one more thing I forgot. Okay, this might be the most important part of the build right here. Haha. Ta-da! Yes. Ah, that feels so good. Okay, so guys, congratulations again. Do me a favor if you like this video, which took a ton of time to create and to edit and to post and to make sure it was all correct. Do me a favor, like and subscribe, hit that notification bell so you can get notified whenever I post new content, okay? Guys, congratulations. Have fun with your new computer. I'll see you soon.